Hello, we have just started broadcasting for our webinar, The Big Three, where we're going to talk about the recent updates with the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson vaccine. We're going to give individuals a few minutes to sign in, but we will start promptly at 1 p.m. I mean, promptly at 12 p.m. We'll be ending at 1 p.m. Look, I'm so excited to talk about it. I'm already at the end of the webinar and we're just starting. So log in, join the fun. We're going to have an open, honest conversation about the vaccines. I'm super excited about the panel that we've assembled. If you participated in our first webinar, you will recognize two familiar faces besides my own, but we also have another expert that has joined in to talk to us and provide us with some information about the vaccines. So I really look forward to getting this going. So let's start. McLaren Flint's Diversity and Inclusion Committee has joined again with McLaren Health Plan to bring you a panel of experts that will talk to you about some of the concerns regarding the three vaccines that we hear about most commonly in the news: Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and Moderna. This webinar is being recorded, so you will be able to view it at a later date or share it with other individuals who were not able to attend today. I have two disclaimers that I would like to discuss before we get into introducing our panel. One, the information related to COVID is changing daily. The information in this webinar is up to date as of April 27th, 2021. The second disclaimer is none of the panel members will receive any significant financial gain by participating in this webinar. Throughout the webinar, we will have an interpreter, an American Sign Language interpreter that will be present throughout the webinar if you are using our Zoom platform. If you participated in the last webinar, I'm a familiar face. If not, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Nicole Franklin. I am by trade a board certified health psychologist, but I function as the assistant medical director here at the McLaren Bariatric and Metabolic Institute. During the COVID pandemic, I have been working inside the hospitals to help provide our healthcare heroes with assistance in not only putting on their protective physical equipment, but also their protective well-being equipment. COVID-19 is vicious. It really hit our state hard. And in the beginning, we pulled together, we flattened a curve, we wore our mask, we stayed home. And just as we thought things were getting better, this new variant comes in and we start seeing spikes. I don't want us to give up. That just means that we need to fight harder. And what we're going to do today is talk about how the vaccines can help us do that. We have a pretty ambitious agenda. We are going to specifically spend some time talking about all three of the major vaccines. In addition, we will have a question and answer section that will be in periodic places throughout the webinar. So it's not just at the end, we'll take your questions throughout. You will have an opportunity, if you're using Zoom, to use the Q&A section that's at the bottom of your screen. If you are using Facebook, you are able to type your questions into the chat function or the comment function. If you are listening over the phone and you have access to the internet, you can email questions. They may not get answered during the webinar, but we will work to answer them within the next 48 hours at the website that you see at the bottom of your screen, mclaren.org/Flint Fight COVID, one word. Again, that's mclaren.org/Flint Fight COVID, one word. Let's get to our panel. First, a familiar face, Dr. Dennis Perry. He is the Chief Medical Officer at McLaren Health Plan and a board certified family physician. New to the panel is Dr. Gregory Forstall. He is dually board certified in both infectious disease and internal medicine. And then finally, another familiar face, Dr. Randall Taylor, who is the Director of Pharmacy at McLaren Health Plan. Thank you, doctors, for being willing to join us. Let's get started by talking about Johnson & Johnson. Dr. Perry, why did the CDC and the FDA recommend a pause with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine?
Well, thank you, Dr. Franklin. So I think most folks probably know that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was paused because of reports of a potentially significant adverse effect that was being seen. Specifically, there were reports of folks who had developed blood clots, serious blood clots, within 2 weeks after receiving the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So it was on April 13th that the CDC and the FDA decided to pause the use of that while the CDC's subgroup, the ACID, was actually looking at the potential side effects and risks of that. So during that time, what they were looking at specifically were 6 cases of an event called thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, or TTS. That's a lot of syllables. Basically a situation that's not well understood. It's a very rare situation that occurs where the body actually creates blood clots in the veins, and at the same time, the platelets in the bloodstream, which are actually responsible for clotting, the numbers and the amount of those tend to go down, so the risk of bleeding becomes greater. It's a treatable but very significant event. There were, out of about 6.7 million doses of the Johnson & Johnson that were administered, there were 6 cases that had been reported. So that was 2 weeks ago, April 13th. Ultimately, on April 23rd, 10 days later, it was recommended to restart the use of the Johnson & Johnson, with a caveat or a warning that in women less than 50, there might be a slight increased risk of that event happening. So it's a very small proportion. During that 10 days, the subcommittee was able to look at those cases. It also, which I think is a bit of a testimony to our reporting and sort of surveillance techniques, it gave us the ability to have physicians and providers look for other potential side effects and report those. There really wasn't a significant increase in those that were reported. And at the end, what the committee decided, and this again is the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, they allowed the CDC to move forward and recommend the use again, because the benefits of this vaccine overall were felt to be greater than the risk of the vaccine.
So a lot of people, even though it's been reinstated, are going to have lots of questions about the safety. Dr. Taylor, how will additional vaccine safety monitoring be conducted?
Hi, Dr. Franklin, and thank you for having me. So it's just so important to note that right now our COVID-19 vaccine administration is being administered under the most intense safety monitoring actually in US history. There are several vaccine safety reporting mediums. The most notable that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention is called VAERS, which is an acronym that stands for Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. And what this system does is it collects reports of possible adverse events after vaccination. And in fact, as a condition of a vaccine's emergency use authorization, the FDA actually requires healthcare professionals to report certain adverse events to VAERS. One other thing that I wanted to point out is that anyone can actually submit possible adverse events to VAERS for reporting's sake, not just healthcare professionals. even if it's not clear if the vaccine actually caused the health problem. There are several other safety monitoring systems that I wanted to bring to everyone's attention. One that we can all participate in somewhat easily. It's a smartphone-based application called vSafe. And what this does is it allows us, once we've been vaccinated, once you download this app, you get personalized reminders at specific times after vaccination. And with that, you can pretty much let the CDC know right away which sort of side effects you're having, if they're mild to moderate and whatnot. And it's just important that, once folks get vaccinated, they use things like this so that we can collect this body of data. There's several other expanded measures that the CDC has put in place for safety monitoring, and I'm just going to refer to my notes here. There's the National Healthcare Safety Network, which is an acute and long-term care facility monitoring system, which reports to VAERS. There's the VSD, which is the Vaccine Safety Data Link. There's CISA, which stands for Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment Project. There's BEST, which stands for Biologics Effectiveness and Safety Systems, and the Sentinel Initiative. I also wanted to point out that there are multiple safety monitoring mediums for pregnant patients as well. VAERS may also be included in that. There's through vSafe, they have a COVID-19 vaccine pregnancy registry. The VSD and CISA also collect data for pregnant patients as well. And there's one more I wanted to point out called, the acronym is BD STEPS, which stands for Birth Defects Study to Evaluate Pregnancy Exposure. So multiple different monitoring measures are in place right now for the safety of these COVID-19 vaccines.
Thank you for that. So I'm starting to feel a little bit better about the vaccine, but when I'm listening to the news, they're specifically talking a lot about how this is affecting women. And Dr. Forstall, can you tell me what is the likelihood that I would experience the adverse event that caused the pause in J&J vaccine if I were to take it?
The numbers that have been reported, and with the pause, Dr. Perry had gone over the data regarding the risks, and they're still fairly small. But for me, as a clinician and also as an individual, there's always that fear of, what if I'm that one? And I think that has to be taken into consideration, that it's nice to say that there are 8 cases with 8 million doses, but what if I'm that 1 in a million? But at the same time, I think individuals need to look at what are the risks of myself getting infected with SARS-CoV-2, and then what are my risks of getting that by holding back and saying I'm not going to get vaccinated. The risks are small, and it would be nice to say that all of the vaccines are incredibly safe and you're not going to have a problem, and that's why you should be vaccinated. For me, the issue, it comes down to look at the risks of receiving a vaccine and look at the risk of sitting back and acquiring COVID-19. You can't really say that, like Tracy Morgan says, I'm pretty sure. You can't really be pretty sure that if you develop COVID-19 that you're not going to have a bad outcome. And I think those risks probably are greater than receiving a vaccine and being that 1 in a million case. And it's an individual. It's not for us to, I tell people I'm not in the convincing business to get people to say you have to do this. Mm-hmm. You really have, from my end, there's 3 buckets that people have to survive in, and you have to participate in one of the 3. Either you're vaccinated, or you acquire COVID-19 and survive with help, or you get COVID-19 and die. And it's basically those 3 buckets. And so one has to look at the risks, and all of those 3 have some significant risks, but the risks of jumping into the vaccine bucket is far less than acquiring COVID-19 or developing COVID-19 and dying. And you really have to look at all of that as one, as opposed to just an individual, what happens if I get the Johnson & Johnson and will I have this problem? It's extremely small, but yet every day we get new information. And it's concerning if you are that 1 in a million. So it's hard to tell somebody that it's never going to happen. There is that risk, but the risk of being vaccinated is far less than what I see every day of people coming into the hospital who thought, gee, I never thought I would have COVID. Now they're receiving oxygen. Now they're receiving corticosteroids. Then they're on high flow oxygen. And then they end up on a ventilator. And those are my concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Forsyth. I really appreciate your honesty. We're getting ready to go into question and answer, and we do have a question that has come up. And the question states, has there been any correlation with birth control and the 6 cases that had clotting issues with Johnson & Johnson? Would one of you like to address that question?
I can at least say that where I've looked for the detail on those specific cases, there has been no mention of that correlation. We do know there's a higher correlation in general. Any woman on birth control pills, any kind of hormones, are at increased risk of blood clots, but these episodes are not a function purely of hormones because of the associated thrombocytopenia that goes with it. So that TTS syndrome is not felt to be due to or connected to hormone use. And that's really all that I can find.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to Pfizer. Pfizer requested FDA clearance for use of their vaccine with kids ages 12 to 15. And I know that there are a lot of studies going on right now. Dr. Perry, when will there be a COVID vaccine for children under the age of 16?
So I was going to jokingly say next week, but it was just a joke because it's not available next week. I can say of the 3 vaccines, Pfizer is the only one right now that is has the emergency use authorization for 16 and older. The other 2, their emergency use authorization is for 18 and older. So, and the reason for that is in the initial phase 3 trial. So the phase 3 trials are when the pharmaceutical companies are doing their large testing to check for efficacy, to see how well the vaccine works and how safe it is. So Pfizer was the only one that was initially enrolling children, adolescents and children in their study. 2 years and older, excuse me, were originally signed up, but the actual trials, the phase 3 trials, only included 16 and older. But some of those folks that originally had signed up had been in a subsequent study specifically focused on ages 12 up to age 16. And that data thus far, which Pfizer has done, shows that it has been safe and it appears to be effective in that age group as well. So they are the first that are going forward to try to get an emergency use authorization from the FDA and an attempt to ideally get this vaccine out to ages 12 up to 16 before September, before everybody goes back to school. Additionally, they are starting to enroll children ages 2 months to age 12 in another trial, again, to look at the efficacy and to look at the safety in that group. And one last side note along with that, as far as immunizing pediatric patients, I point to what's been done or what's been looked at in Israel. Israel is one of the countries that has the highest immunization rate in the world right now. And they have driven down the number of cases of COVID. They've opened up commerce in their country. I think 4 days ago, there was the first report that their daily deaths from COVID were 0. And in that country, interestingly enough, they are only immunizing 16 and older. So we have a lot more to learn about immunizing children right now against COVID. I do think it's critical in this country because of particularly the most recent surges in Michigan. but we still have a lot yet to learn.
So, Dr. Taylor, I'm going to address this question to you. I got my vaccine, my second shot early January. I'm starting to get concerned about how long my vaccine immunity will last. What kind of information do you have about that?
Oh, thanks for asking that question. But it's sad to say, unfortunately, that there's just no data right now to support exactly how long. It's currently being evaluated. Some experts say, as much as 6 months. Others say 1 year. But unfortunately, there is no clear answer on that. So, with that being said, once you are fully vaccinated, we still want to take the same precautions that we were taking before, as far as masking when we're out in public, social distancing, and that. However, there are some certain things that we can do once we're fully vaccinated, which the CDC has provided a little table of things that we can do once we're fully vaccinated. But unfortunately, right now, it is not known how long the protection from the COVID-19 vaccine will last.
Dr. Forstall, a lot of my friends work in the medical field and we've been vaccinated. Can we start having parties? What do you think?
I still think we have to be extremely careful. And the CDC is coming out with recommendations about those who have been vaccinated, and if they're indoors with the rest of the members of the same family, if they're vaccinated, that they can mingle, so to speak. And if there's an individual who may not have been vaccinated but has a low risk, that people can, in a sense, mingle. But for the most part, caution is still of utmost importance. And if large gatherings are certainly a no-no. If people are outdoors, then those are considered, if you're running and you want to not wear a mask, I think that's been told that's been pretty safe. But for the most part, if you have someone in your household who is immunocompromised or elderly and they have not been vaccinated, that even if you've been vaccinated, it's still important to wear a mask for their protection. And it's tough to be carrying a mask, wearing it, taking it off, wearing it, taking it off. So, and you don't know who you're in a sense running into. So this disease is one where we have to think about our neighbor rather than worrying about ourselves. And those are just my concerns. We still have to be very, very careful. We're seeing cases where one person is positive and then it spreads throughout a family. And I think this is not only for people to understand, but also for the medical profession to understand that there are therapeutics that are available that can help that individual instead of waiting. A lot of the doctors are prescribing azithromycin and corticosteroids right up front for someone who has COVID-19. There's a lot of focus on the actual patient, but we have to also look a little bit further and say, there are contacts, and to get a hold of those contacts, because there are early treatments that are available that'll be very, very helpful. These combination monoclonal antibodies. If it's the right individual, timing is of essence. And these are people that you can prevent to end up in the hospital if you can institute these treatments early. And I know that gets away in terms of the masking and so forth, but these are things that we're seeing every day, and we're trying to knock down this pandemic. And I know that the vaccines are critical in getting us to that. But those who have not been vaccinated, the people that choose to jump in that box of, I'm just going to get COVID-19, we do have therapeutics that can help you if you end up choosing that bucket. But you have to, the healthcare providers who do that test and say that, oh, if this person's positive, they need to know that it's not appropriate just to go home and sit in quarantine if you're at high risk. It's not appropriate to get an antibiotic for a viral infection such as this. It's not appropriate to just go home on an antibiotic and a steroid. That there are treatments that are available for certain populations that can keep you home, that can keep you away from being admitted to the hospital. And the word really needs to get out about some of these therapies. And I tell people, this is 2021, it's not 2020. We can't continue to have these snafus. Hank Stram talks about in Super Bowl IV for from the sidelines says, we can't make mistakes in this game. And this is true with COVID. We cannot make mistakes in this game. We're in a year into the pandemic, and we need to make the right decisions, both from a medical side and even from a family side. We can't just say, oh, well, I have COVID, I'm just gonna go home and help grandma. No, or I've been vaccinated, everything is okay, let's just hang out. We've got to do better. And we just have to be very, very careful. As we know, every day there's something new is there. So I would vie on the side of being cautious rather than being reckless.
I agree. Let's get a question from our audience. This person is asking about why an individual who has been vaccinated still contracted COVID.
I can take that one, Dr. Franklin. Two things. One is that in Michigan, we know that most of the cases right now are from the variant, the UK variant, and the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines we know do give protection, but not complete protection. So it can still happen, and sort of an adjunct to what Dr. Forstall was saying too about, and what you asked about, can we go out and party if we've been vaccinated? I read an interesting statistic this past weekend. So in the United States, of 84 million people who had gotten both doses of their vaccine, of those 84 million, just under 6,000 actually contracted the disease. So there's a small percentage of folks that can still get COVID. Of those 6,000, just under 400 were admitted to the hospital. And of those 400, 72 had died. So those are some real numbers that just reinforce what Dr. Forstall was saying. And I think what most of us believe in our worlds is that it does give you a feeling of satisfaction, or at least of safety. And it's not totally false, but when you're talking about percentages and risk and benefit, there still is a risk that you can contract a variant. And until we have boosters or of some sort to cover the variants, we still need to be very cautious.
Thank you. And if I may add to that, Dr. Perry, thank you for that answer. Just to remind everyone that, these vaccines, are truly meant to boost our immune system so that we can better fight this SARS-CoV-2 virus. These vaccines really do help to prevent the more severe cases, which would require, ICU admissions and oxygen use. So it's not a panacea to just prevent, someone from contracting COVID-19, but it definitely increases our chances if we do come in contact with SARS-CoV-2, that our course is less likely to be severe. So I just wanted to bring that out.
And one other thing, and it's what we're noticing in the hospital is that people are being vaccinated and they'll say, oh, I had my first shot and now I'm in the hospital with COVID-19. And we're not pre-testing people. I have a strong suspicion that a lot of people are coming to the place to get their vaccine and they have COVID already and they're getting vaccinated. And of course, then they're blaming the vaccine as being responsible for them to get the infection. And it would really slow things down if you pre-tested people. But we have a strong suspicion that a lot of people just don't know. They come in, they're infected, and they come in and get a shot, think, oh, everything's great, but it's not great. And that's another reason why it's important to continue the protection of those that are at high risk.
Do we have any indication why some individuals don't have symptoms at all? And then some individuals get to the point where they're in need of a ventilator?
I wish we knew, because there are some, you'll see someone who's 90 years old and they're walking out and they have every reason to do poorly. And then you see someone who's age 50 and suddenly they have some of the bad complications from COVID-19. They will have a heart attack, they'll have a stroke, they'll have a pulmonary embolism, they'll have deep vein thrombosis, and which gets to that whole comment about, I'm pretty sure I'm doing okay, but you can't really make those predictions. We have relationships of, if you're overweight, or if you have high blood pressure, if you have heart disease, or if you have diabetes, some immunocompromised condition, you're at risk. But it doesn't mean that just because of those factors, you're going to do poorly. We do have therapeutics which can help pull people out of the fire if they're initiated in the proper timing, if antivirals are given fairly early, if the corticosteroids are given at the proper time, people can do well. But we can have people that do everything correctly, they end up on the ventilator. It doesn't have to be the ventilator, but they may have bad outcomes or have some chronic symptoms after they leave the hospital. So it's not, it would be nice if it was cookbook. And sometimes I feel that we just throw the kitchen sink at people because we figure we've got to do everything for them. And it doesn't necessarily work out that way. And true, that our innate immune system, which is what the first response, which is why we feel that the children do much better than the adults. They have a very good innate immune system, and they can battle the virus before it gets to the point where the inflammatory phase of the disease kicks in.
Thank you. There have been many questions about the Moderna vaccine as well. One of the questions that came up recently with a client I was working with was they were wondering if they would test positive for COVID-19 on a viral test after they get the vaccine. Dr. Perry, can you answer that?
I can. The answer is no. Specifically with any of the vaccines. So all three vaccines, when you get the vaccine, it uses an RNA prototype, if you will, to make the spikes that you see in those pictures of the virus. And those spikes are made by our own cells internally, and they are sort of presented to our immune system. Our immune system recognizes those and makes antibodies that attach to the spikes. And if the virus then gets in your system, it will attach to the spikes, and our immune system will hopefully, most likely, eradicate the virus. So again, if you get the vaccine, what you have are antibodies. The cells of our system that take in the vaccine do create the spikes, but they are in our bloodstream and they're internal in our immune system. So when you have a nasal swab or a throat swab or a nasopharyngeal swab done, there are none of the spike proteins there. So the testing right now, if we're looking for antigens, it's the rapid test, which looks actually for the spikes to be present. They're not going to be present, so it will not be positive. If you have the PCR test, the test that takes longer, that's actually looking for the mRNA of the virus itself, which if you've had the vaccine, you're not going to have that. So the PCR test will also be negative. If you are having an antibody test done to see if you have antibodies, which I don't know if anybody's doing that much anymore, if you've had the vaccine, you will have the antibodies. So you could test positive and probably would test positive for those antibodies.
And you would think that would be the goal, right? That to have some antibodies to help you fight it should you encounter it again. Dr. Taylor, how well do the vaccines prevent a person from spreading the virus?
Well, the jury is still out on that. So we really don't know. However, just to piggyback along with what Dr. Perry was saying a few moments ago, there is quite a bit of promising data that's being released out of Israel. And just some preliminary results of their studies have shown, like for patients who have been vaccinated and then contracted COVID-19, their viral load, which they're using as a proxy for someone's infectiousness, is actually fourfold less than someone who was not vaccinated. So that preliminary data suggests that someone who has been vaccinated and then subsequently contracts COVID-19 would have a 4-fold less viral load, which suggests not easily less, how can I say this? Less transmittable because their viral load is less. But like I said, that data is not conclusive, but it's currently being researched. And I believe they're doing studies down over in England, the Panther study. They're also looking into this. So hopefully, we can have some guidance soon as these studies are ongoing.
Dr. Forstall, the religious community has really taken a strong stance, some of them, on whether or not individuals should get vaccinated or not. And a lot of it's based on whether or not the COVID vaccine contains fetal cells. Can you address that concern?
Sure. The messenger RNA vaccines utilize fetal cell line, which is different than fetal tissue. And this cell line comes from a elective abortion on, I believe it was in the Netherlands, and it's a kidney cell line from 1973. And this cell has been able to be reproduced, and there's a large pool that people can use to perform, at least in the beginning, the research. And as this is a viral infection, and part of the research is to see that a human cell is the way to determine whether or not this vaccine that's being produced works. And so in the beginning, in the research phase, that particular kidney cell line was used for the research for both the Moderna as well as the Pfizer. But as far as the actual production of the vaccine for the Pfizer, for instance, the fetal cell line was not used for that purpose. The same can't be said for the Johnson & Johnson, which uses a fetal cell line from retina, and it was from an elective abortion, I think, again from the Netherlands in 1985. So these are far removed from the actual event or the abortion. So I know that there's been documents discussing this issue and looking at the pros and cons. Some have said that, well, we should look at if there's an alternative. You can split hairs and say, well, the Pfizer has the least exposure of use of the fetal cell lines, in particular the kidney cell line, as opposed to Johnson & Johnson, which actually uses a virus vehicle. So it actually needs that cell line in order for the production of the vaccine. So if you kind of string them along, you can say, well, it's Pfizer, Moderna, and then J&J probably has the most use. But from a moral standpoint, there's many different opinions. Some opinions say use the vaccine that has the least usage, because it's just research only. But if you're getting the Pfizer, you're really not getting any fetal cell line or fetal tissue. Same thing with the Moderna. It's involved in some of the testing, but not into the actual production of the Moderna. But if you look at what's actually the well-being that you're doing for the entire country and the globe, that there's more, the well-being that you're giving by taking the vaccine, preventing harm to your neighbor, that outweighs you're not personally involved in an abortion, as opposed to other topics which are not part of this discussion, where fetuses are used and the tissue is used for research. That's really not at all what's going on with the production of the vaccines. So it's felt that it's morally okay to receive the vaccine. Some have taken a stronger stance and said that, well, you should use the product that has the least exposure in the process regarding fetal cell lines.
I think that's a good distinction you made about Moderna in saying that it was used in the development, but not in the actual vaccine that people receive. Right. I have a few questions that have come in. One is an individual who received the Pfizer vaccine. However, after receiving the vaccine, contracted COVID-19. They wanted to know if there were any boosters that they should be getting.
So I can take that, Dr. Franklin. Right now, there actually are no boosters, so it's kind of a moot point. I think if the individual had gotten one of the two, the first of the two, and then got the contracted COVID, if they're asking should they get the second, and perhaps Dr. Forstall would know the answer. I think the CDC might still recommend it, although in a sense, frankly, getting the virus itself is the same as getting a booster. And there's a lot of talk about folks who have had an actual infection and recovered only needing one of the two mRNA vaccines to complete a series, but that's only been talked about, not definitively recommended.
And then Dr. Perry, there's a specific question for you. And it says, did Dr. Perry say someone with a vaccination would have a PCR negative test even if they subsequently contracted COVID?
No, I'm sorry if I misspoke. So if you contract COVID, that means that you have been around somebody who has the infection. Those droplets are in the air. They get into your nasopharynx, into your mouth, into your nose and throat, where they do replicate in that nasal environment. So if they do a swab and test it, you will be positive. So if you do contract the actual virus from somebody else, the infection, you will test positive. But if you don't have an infection, you've just gotten the vaccine, you will not test positive.
One more question from the audience. My 18-month-old great niece had COVID. Can she get it again?
I think that goes to the question of how long does one have immunity after having an infection? The simple answer is we don't know. We do know that folks who have gotten COVID infection, it's relatively rare that they'll get another infection, but now we have variants. So if you get the original strain, you theoretically at some point could get an infection from a variant. In an 18-month-old with not having a fully developed immune system yet, we have no clue how long that immunity will last. So we definitely have no answer, but I think that at some point in the future, if one of my patients was asking my opinion, not based on any data, but just what I know about this virus and other viruses, I would tell them that I would still protect that child because the risk of a second infection down the road, even 6 months down the road, is still possible.
There's a part 2 to this question as well. So this child now has a brother who was born a month ago while the mother had COVID. They want to know, does the baby have antibodies?
So I'll take part 2, but anybody else can chime in as well. So mom had COVID during, so it depends. If it was during the pregnancy and then she recovered and had the baby, there's no risk of transmission, intrauterine transmission of the virus. If mom had COVID after the baby was born, then, and particularly if mom is being with the baby, even with a mask and nursing, which means a lot of contact, it is possible that the baby could have picked up that virus from mom. We tend to see in the younger children less symptoms, but possible carrier. Again, not a lot of studies are done. I know I'm in the Lansing area. I know there was just an article in the Lansing paper this weekend that the youngest individual hospitalized at Sparrow Hospital in Lansing, the pediatric unit with COVID, is 2 months of age. So
Wow.
I might have danced around that a little bit, so I apologize if I didn't give you a straight answer.
Dr. Forstall, should individuals get vaccinated if they have underlying health conditions or if they are immunocompromised?
Simple answer is yes. If you have an autoimmune disorder, there's no contraindication why you cannot receive the vaccine. There are certain caveats that one would have to be aware that you may not develop as strong of a response as you would with just someone who didn't have any immunocompromising conditions. This is a reason why the monoclonal antibodies are never probably going to go out of favor. Let's say someone is a transplant recipient that may not really respond to the vaccine, but if they were in a position where they contracted COVID-19, that would be someone where you really would jump on to be sure that you caught that individual early. And that's the one that doesn't get antibiotics and steroids. That's the one that gets to the hospital very quickly and would receive the combination monoclonal antibody as soon as possible, which in a sense is kind of the prepackaged meal. They don't have to go through the process of making having the messenger RNA, producing the spike protein, the body seeing it, making antibodies. Everything's already made. Just rip the package open and there you get the antibodies are ready to go. And so that's kind of a no-brainer, but that's another thing that's, it's important to be aware that that option is available for people who you feel may not respond as well to the vaccine. So they have kind of two options that they have for them. But there's really no reason why people cannot receive any of the vaccines. And again, with this discussion of the vaccines, I have just the candy bar response, whether it's Snickers, Butterfinger, Milky Way, I really don't care. Just pick one and get started, because this whole idea of, yeah, I don't know, and tons of questions. We're a year into the pandemic, and it's amazing the questions that we get about something. And there are other issues which you would expect people to have lots more. We eat foods that have preservatives and that carcinogens. We drink pop that different products that can cause cancer. No questions. But the vaccine, it's amazing how many questions we get. And I get back to the same concept. And people feel like it's my right for this vaccine. The problem is that this whole pandemic is Jumanji. The pieces are on the board. You have to play. There's no, I'm going to sit back and just sit and watch. So you have to participate. And then, so if you think you're being cool by saying, I'm not going to take the vaccine, that's fine. You've just eliminated the 3 buckets, just went down to 2. And then we're back to Tracy Morgan about how you want to be certain, or you want to be, I'm pretty sure that I'm just going to go ahead and get COVID. And are you pretty sure that you're going to do okay? Are you going to have some problems? And it really comes down to that. Our goal is to take that 4th bucket, which are susceptible people, and shrink it as quickly as possible. Because if you're sitting and in that susceptible bucket, you're basically a Motel 6. We're leaving the light on, and you're leaving the light on for the virus to come and set up shop at any time. And you can either take charge and jump in and get a vaccine, pick one, look at the adverse reactions and know that there's some risks and just get it done. That's the way for what I would feel to be certain. Or you can take your risk and either hope that medical technology will help you stay in the COVID but survived and not fall into the COVID and dead. But you have to pick one of the 3 buckets at some point. And if you want to kind of frolic and have fun, then get out of the bucket that is the susceptible bucket. And we want to shrink that as much as possible. So make a decision. And if you don't want to pick the vaccine bucket, you're looking at one of 2 very serious buckets. One, you can't be sure what your outcome is. So to me, if you have underlying health conditions and you want to roll that dice, it's very frustrating to see a year down the road that people are still coming in the hospital having complications from coronavirus disease 2019, saying, I can't believe I got the COVID. Well, again, you have to participate. And if you're at risk and your participation, you may not have the horses to pull you out of the fire.
Good information. So let's talk about some general vaccination concerns. Dr. Perry, should individuals be vaccinated if they're pregnant, trying to conceive, or breastfeeding?
Yes. So if you're asking my opinion, and really it just supports too what Dr. Forstall was saying. I think that individuals should strongly consider that. Officially, right now, as far as getting vaccinated, when you are pregnant, the feeling is that it's very unlikely that the vaccine will pose a risk in pregnancy, and that unlikely is chosen because the long-term studies haven't fully been completed. So when the original two, Moderna and Pfizer, did their phase 3 trials, and also when Johnson & Johnson did theirs, they did not design their trials to include pregnant women. Now, there were women who were pregnant that did get the vaccine in their trials, and they have followed those women, and they have not seen any serious or adverse outcomes in those women. Now, there is an ongoing few trials that are going on now, specifically with women that are pregnant. And thus far, the data looks good, looks like it is very safe and effective. The American College of OBGYN feels too that there should be a choice made, but that the advantage to getting vaccinated outweighs the risk, in the sense that women who are pregnant are at a higher than average risk just because of pregnancy of developing a complication from the COVID virus that could lead to them being hospitalized or even ventilated. That risk is even greater in women who have those other comorbidities, as we call them, or risks such as obesity or gestational diabetes. So all of that factors in, and the choice is always of, which do you see as a bigger deal, the risk of something bad happening or the value of getting a vaccine? So the data seems to support that. And for folks that are thinking along those lines and not sure what to do, there's a great resource that you can go to, a website called Mother to Baby. It's just like it sounds, MOTHERTOBABY. If you Google that. If you don't have access to the internet, there's a phone number, 1-866-626-6847, 1-866-626-6847. Great resource for those questions. If you are trying to conceive, it's really no different. If you're breastfeeding and you have been vaccinated or you get the vaccine, there is a chance, we feel, although it's not been studied, that there will be antibodies to the COVID virus that will be in the breast milk to help protect your infant. So if you get the vaccine and you are nursing, you are not putting your infant at any risk. Probably you're putting your infant in a more advantageous spot. So that's my opinion.
All right. We have 2 more questions that I want to make sure that we get to, and we're running low on time. So we've got about 7 minutes before we have to do a hard stop. Dr. Taylor, can you give us a little bit of information about whether or not, or how long it takes for individuals to be completely vaccinated after they get their second dose of either Moderna or Pfizer?
Sure. A person is considered fully vaccinated 2 weeks after their second dose of either the Pfizer or Moderna vaccines. That's 2 weeks.
Dr. Forstall, will individuals still be protected from the virus if they are late getting their second vaccine dose of either the Moderna or Pfizer vaccine?
Yes, there's a JAMA article that looks at the percentages of first dose and protection. I believe the Moderna data was better initially for that first dose than the Pfizer, but this scenario happens all the time in the hospital, that people are in the hospital and we ask them, have you had the vaccine? They said, yes, I've had the first dose, but my dose is Tuesday and they're not going to be leaving the hospital. They're protected. They need to schedule that second shot as soon as they're discharged.
So I just got a question. Somebody got the first shot of Moderna. They just refused the second shot. Now they're 4 months out and they want to get vaccinated. Should they start all over again or should they just get that second shot?
I would say they would just get that second shot.
Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes left and we're not going to have enough time to address the last question and answer section, but I do want you to know, for those in the community, if you're watching, you can still submit questions even after the webinar is complete at the website that I gave earlier, the mclaren.org/Flint Fight COVID, one word, and it's at the bottom of this screen. In addition, we have 3 other websites that are available for information and resources that are updated regularly. The first is the michigan.gov website. Not only do they have the stats about what's going on in Michigan, they have links to the individual health departments within your community, so you can find out specific information about vaccination sites or clinics that are going to be offering walk-in vaccines in your area. A lot of places in Michigan are opening up and having vaccine appointments. So if you tried to get one somewhere before and wasn't able, I suggest, and you're so interested in getting the vaccine, you circle back around, because a lot of those places are having open appointments or even a callback list. If someone misses their appointment, they can maybe get you in sooner. The next link is the Center for Disease Control. And again, that's the federal government website, and it'll give you an idea of what's going on across the country. It will also talk to you about the latest research. Most of the information that we get and present to you comes directly from the CDC. Lastly, I talk about our mclaren.org website. We also have updated information on the vaccine, as well as information about our visitation policy and any drive-through clinics that we may be offering. We've partnered with Walgreens with vaccine distribution, and that has been going really, really well. But to get that information as it changes readily, using our mclaren.org website is a good place to go. I want to thank Drs. Forstall, Perry, and Taylor for donating your time and expertise to educating the community about the COVID-19 vaccinations. You provided us with so much useful information. And I think the Motel 6 comment will go down in COVID vaccination history in regards to people thinking about just how dangerous and how important it is to protect yourself in any way that you possibly can. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us. I know that we have a lot of things going on in our busy lifetime, and that you took your time during your lunch break or whatever the break you were taking during the day to spend with us to get this information. We are grateful for that. And I want to say, in closing, don't miss your shot to stop COVID or to at least slow it down. Take care.